Welcome back. Happy Monday. What shall we talk about? What's on our minds? What do I mean when I say what's on our minds? Well, we all, of course, have our individual minds that we um, feel is our own secret and private place, but there's a place as our minds deepen where we move into our collective mind, our unified mind, and I always get the feeling that as a group, we call forth particular things that we want or need to hear, and I'd like to think that I can sense that to some degree. I think we all can. I don't think I'm making any special claim that as we do this spiritual game more and more and more, we tap into places in mind that are not just of service to ourselves, but of service and uplift to everyone around us. With that in mind, what I wanted to talk about might be an interesting subject, but it's moving from barely enough to more than enough. So, what do I mean by barely enough? Well, maybe for a while, you or I have been living in a particular area of life where it's been enough, but just barely enough to get by. And I want to emphasize as I speak on this particular topic this week the absolute overwhelming presence of gratitude and appreciation and thankfulness for all that we do have in every single area. But we all know the pinch of scarcity or lack in a particular area of our lives, and it's different for everybody. Maybe you've been living on barely enough of health and fitness. Maybe you've been living on enough, but just barely enough of finance and money. Maybe you've been living on just barely enough of love and intimacy and compassion. Maybe in some area of your life you've been living on enough, but just barely enough of recreation and self expression and feeling like you're heard and making a difference in the world. And we are spiritual beings, and living on barely enough, while it's while it's certainly something to be grateful for what we do have, we are not barely enough creatures. And if we're living on barely enough, that means we're really living on our own conception of things rather than the truth of things. Because the truth of things, of course, is God, love, source is infinite, and there's no shortage to the supply. I've always marveled at this thought. We could take any amount out of infinity, and there's infinity left over. So living on barely enough is not God's will. Being resigned to being living on barely enough is, I I would have to agree with Emmett Fox on this. Being resigned is not a virtue, as some old-fashioned religionists say. Being resigned to barely enough or not enough is a sin, meaning we're missing the mark, we're missing the point, and we need to repent. We need to metanoia, as it says in Greek. We need to turn, repent, and walk the other way. Well, how would we do that if there's an area in your life where it's barely enough, then we begin to move toward more than enough. And where are a couple of places in the great world scriptures where it talks about this? Well, in one place it says, He prepares a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. So as I'm going through any great difficulty, God, love, source, hears our call and is preparing a banquet, a smorgasbord. Our heads are anointed with oil, which just means we're blessed and increased at the innermost of ourselves. And then, of course, it concludes with our cups runneth over and over and over again. And one other place, as I was thinking on from barely enough to more than enough, is it says something like, uh, I'm going to do a brand new, fresh thing. I'm going to bring streams in the desert. That's such a crazy idea to think that in the wilderness, in the desert, where it's dry and parched and life-threatening, and there's not only is there not water, there certainly aren't streams and fresh, lively rivers flowing. But I think this is the mindset and the faith we need to stir up and stimulate inside of ourselves. And we can do it in any moment simply by recognizing when we feel the pinch of scarcity or barely enough in any area of our life to know that what's promised as divine beings, if we get out of the way and come into alignment, is our cups runneth over. We begin to have access to infinity, and we can take any amount out of it, and no one else is hurt by it. We're not getting someone else's supply. Everyone else has access to this great source. So this week, I'm going to be thinking on where do I feel like I'm living on barely enough. And I know my area, and I know where it hurts, and I know the pinch. And why am I living in barely enough when in truth and in spirit I can have more than enough? There's something inside of me that I can clean up, that I can begin to eliminate, and I can begin to pray on. And um, I invite you, suggest to playfully do the same thing. Let's make this more than enough beginning for ourselves. Anyway, see you all tomorrow.